All right. Skyway to Shell. This is a fun level. I actually wonder if I can do this. Alright, so the idea behind this level is straight up just shells. And I want to talk about this one in particular because it kind of spawned a lot of shell levels. This level is kind of the reason why a bunch of shell levels exist. So for the beginning, we'll talk about the facts. It took me 17 hours to make this level. It was almost the longest level to make, actually. It took longer to make this level than U-Break, if you didn't know that. And it only took me an hour and a half to upload though, so it wasn't too hard. The hardest part was setting up the level. And the reason why it took so long to set up this level is because of this guy. So when I made this level, not only was I like, hey, I'm gonna make a level just only shell jumps, I was also gonna make part of it having to keep a shell here. See, when you hit this shell, it spawns all the way up the top of the level. And the shell is actually above the level the entire time. So the reason why it took so long to design this is because I had to make sure the shell that was following you on top of the level was timed perfectly for the end of the level. Because the very last shell jump in this level is that red Koopa. Because it hits this block, which makes this Koopa fall down and do your final shell jump. Yeah, this is Skyway to Shell. So the beginning of this level is pretty simple. It does regular, like, not off the wall shell jumps. But then the rest gets a little crazy. So like the first couple shell jumps, you're just like, oh, whatever. You just hold right, and basically you want to kick these shells as soon as you grab them. So these are very, pretty neat timings. Coin blocks here to prevent cheese, because if you use the shell miss to damage boost, you can't go above. Well, that's my cheese prevention tech. So you have these shell jumps. And then from this point onwards, it gets a little crazy. So even though this level is entirely shell jumps, I do try to make it entertaining by avoiding repetition, by making shell jumps different a little each time. So for example, right, these shell jumps normal, and then you do the reverse off this left wall shell jump, and then you do a little one where you have to grab the shell precisely. And then here's one where you have to kind of bounce off the shells as it's bouncing off the springboard. And then here's one where you have to throw the shell upwards, etc. All these shell jumps are a little different. Makes it a little more exciting. So this is another level similar to with U-Break, where I had to test from kind of pretty much the beginning of the level. And that's why, again, it took that long to make it and design it. Because the timings need to line up. And since this level is kind of like a non-stop level where you're never touching the ground, you're never pausing at any moment, it's pretty brutal playtesting. I think I did manage to playtest from like this point onwards, but it was a very difficult process to playtest, I'll tell you that much. So this level is also iconic because it kind of like got people thinking about shell setups, because in Mario Maker there's only one way to get a shell without the Koopa in it, because you know how like you have the Koopa and you bonk on it, then it turns into a shell like this. The only way to do that is with a Shelmet. But the problem with Shelmets is if you approach it from below, it turns into a Shelmet and you can damage boost. So in order to avoid that, I came up with this abomination. Basically, a Shelmet on a spring which hits a block below a Koopa, it turns into a grabbable shell that won't turn into a Shelmet and that you can grab from below. Same with this Koopa right here. So this is one of the challenges I found as a level designer. Getting shells to be set up in precise places so that they can be kicked, grabbed, thrown, whatever. Without Shelmets, because Shelmets, they can introduce potential cheese because of the damage boost that you can get from it. So this level was uploaded on December 14th, 2015. So 3 months the game's gone by. People are starting to get a grasp of Kaizo level design. They're starting to understand common setups, common tricks, things like that. But there wasn't really a setup for that type of shell. So this was its earliest kind of like rendition. Nowadays there's a lot more cleaner setups for getting shells. But since this level was based entirely on shells, I had to come up with a very complicated setup. But thankfully people have come up with more simplistic setups. Usually it involves like a muncher on a bomb with a block, which is a lot cleaner than this. Like, look how much space this takes up. Because I also have to make room for these blocks, which push the shell off. So it was pretty it was pretty complicated. But moving on to this part. So here we see the big boy shell. We got this big boy. And again, you can't grab the big boy, you gotta just run into it and bonk into it. But this is to set up this guy, and this is known as the Shellevator. And oh boy, this was certainly something back in the day. Shellevators now are so compact, but because this was, I guess, the first Shellevator, a lot of my Mario Maker levels were kind of like, I'm the first person to do this, so I have to come up with a setup. So since I was the first person to be like, hey, I want to create like a elevator type shell jump thing, I came up with this. So there's 4 Koopas here, 4 shells that you need to grab. And they all kind of use the same idea with the Shelmet off of springboard to hit the block from below. So you can see it here, you can see it here, you can see it here, you can see it here. And spawning is probably the most important part for this, because how this game works is things spawn horizontally, and any like sprite on the same x-axis, so like the same column, they always get spawned at the same time. So here, right, we have a Koopa and the springboard, they're on the same column, so that way it makes the spawning consistent. Because I had to meticulously place these tracks a certain distance, like that's why this is a curve, right? I actually had to bring out the 6-head mathematics for this, because if you use a curve instead of a straight line, it takes a longer distance to travel the curve, so therefore it will make the springboard go to this Shelmet a little later. Even if it's like a hair later, it's important for the spawn, because if you see here, the Koopa is like almost walking off the coin block before it gets spawned. So that's very important, because I need it to be hit later so that it's more to the right so you can grab it. And it's the reason why like this Koopa isn't on the floor, because it needs time to fall so then it can travel forward. Like that. So it is way complicated. And it's one of the reasons why there's such a big gap here, because if you want consistent spawns, which is probably the most important thing as a Kaizo level designer. You need consistent spawns because most of your setups rely on sprites being spawned at a certain time. Because if you force the player to do the same thing, you need that sprite to be in the same position every time. So in order to make spawns consistent, you just have to hold right and travel at max speed so that these guys always spawn at the same time and by the same offset, as opposed to if you traveled like this. Now the spawns are all hecked up because you went so much slower. This guy spawns slower than this guy, which throws off this entire mechanical thingy-majiggy piece of complicated BS. So I think this part alone took like a couple hours to design. And it was a pain in the ass, I'll tell you. But it looks cool and it's done well. Fortunately, I can't really... Actually, I think I can show you if I do like this. Yeah, I think this is how I play tested it. Cause it was I believe the first time you saw like a dude. I keep saying sh because of all the shells I had to say. The first time you see like an elevator of shells. Actually, don't need P speed, but. Yeah, there we go. You see this? There's the shell elevator when it actually works. So this level is important because it got people thinking about how to use Koopas. Because again, you couldn't get shellless Koopas, otherwise they turn into shellmets. You got people trying to come up with better setups so that you can grab shells, and I'm very happy that people did that because this is complicated to time and things, so it makes it easier for people to make shell levels. So again, yeah, this level is only shell jumps, so this part was super cool. You got to do left rights because you can see the saws on each side, so you got to do shell jump on the right side here, shell jump on the left side, jump on the right side, etc. I'd say about this is like halfway through the level, if not a little further. And then you get to this part. This part actually lines up a little cleaner than I expected it to, but basically as you're falling, the moment you grab the shell, you kick it. This one I could use a shellmet because you're approaching it from below, from above, so it doesn't really turn into a shellmet. So this is where we actually get Yoshi, and I can't really show you this because I did have to play test from back here and things like that, but you get a Yoshi here, and then you start doing Yoshi shell jump mechanics, and that's why we have all these Podoboos, because like with Kaizo level design, you need to discard whatever you have at the latest possible time, so we gotta keep Yoshi, can't hit these guys, otherwise bad things will happen. That's why this guy's a little cubby. So you can actually eat these guys, you spit them out, they turn into shells, so we don't need this complicated setup, which is nice, and that's one of the reasons why I do Yoshi. That's why I have these buzzy beetles instead of shellmets. This has to be a shellmet because this is when you get off Yoshi. But we can watch the clear video after this because there's no way I'm going to be able to show you this. But this part was very complicated to set up, and I'm very happy it did work out. But Yoshi... Yoshi, you dismount Yoshi and he like rides up here, I think? And then you do like 2 final shell jumps. I consider these 2 final ones because after these 2, it's all about the preparation for the final shell jump. And the final shell jump is all not chokes. Because you can choke it or you can not choke it. But yeah, so that's where this level ends. I give you the mushroom. Why did I give you a mushroom? I don't know why I give you a mushroom. Probably to prevent cheese or something. But you do a shell jump while big, and the timing is a little different. I think you have to throw the shell a little earlier, but I don't remember. So you do need the mushroom to damage boost through here. And that's this level. Also, you can see the top, all the sprites are grayed out because I used the max number of sprites. And honestly, half those sprites are probably to set up this elevator. Like, look at how many sprites are here. But I can show you the clear video. Sub Fawful. But yeah, again, this level is pretty significant because it spawned a lot of shell jump levels. And like Mario Maker now, pretty much almost every Kaiser level has a shell jump, and I am partly to blame for that. And same with this level. But I mean, I had this idea in my head. I was like, what if I just made a level just entirely shells? It would be a pain in the ass to design, but I'd do it. And we came up with this. So now we can show you Skyway the shell. Oh, actually the death counter here. I actually only died like 300 something times. 331. Yeah, so this level wasn't hard. It was just hard to, it wasn't hard to do, it was hard to make. If that makes sense. So we'll show you the clear video. This is personally one of my favorite levels to make. Yeah, wave bend. Too bad you can't train each segment. Oh yeah, the 1-ups. Yeah, I love the 1-ups that you always get. Oh yeah, look, I also put arrows. That was actually kind of nice, and started putting arrows in my levels. There's the shell elevator. Dude, it's possible! Let's go! Let's fucking go! First try! Oh my god! Yatta! Oh, okay, so the possible part.
Wow.
We can explain the possible part. Okay, so the possible part means that when I was uploading this level, I had no idea if the shell at the very beginning of the level, right? The shell that I was talking about right here. I had no idea if it was actually going to line up and fall at the perfect time for the final shell jump. So that's what I meant by first time. And the way I kind of eyeballed it is when I played the level in segments, right? I had to time how long it took me to reach a certain point. So like, for example, we start from here, right? And we do the level up until like, let's say, like right here. I would check the time to see how much time I had left. Let's say I get to this point like, 485, right? So then I would go and above the level, and then I would check to see if the shell reaches like this part of the screen at 45. And if it does, then we're in good shape. And if it doesn't, then I tweak these conveyors to go faster or slower depending on if it's too fast or too slow. And then I would do that for the second half or whatever, see how long it takes to get to this point or whatever. Let's say it takes like 20 seconds. Then I have to add 20 seconds from like 45 and be like, okay, does the shell reach this point at that at that amount of time? So then we had to do the quick maths, right? So then I was like, okay, the shell gets here at, whatever. I think we should we just kind of have to do the level and see if it falls at the right time. And thankfully, with my galaxy brain, we managed to have the shell fall at the perfect time. And then you can beat the level. Yeah, kind of like what I did with the April Fool's level. Yeah, I also have to make sure the shell stayed on screen at all times. That's why this part is here. The shell has to go back and forth so that you don't go too far ahead or behind the shell. Same with the shell elevator, right? You're on this screen for like 5 seconds. That's why this is here, to slow down the shell. So it was a lot of work to line this up.